Hey gang, I'm back here again with another comic book interview. Talking to Spike Trotman was an absolute pleasure. She and I have known each other for a long time and have really seen the changing world in terms of publishing and the importance of, digital and the internet in what we do. Spike was there at the start in terms of webcomics and putting her work directly online, and then made that transition over to building an entire publisher really from scratch and using Kickstarter as the bedrock of that publishing model. She knows a ton about the industry. She has taken the blows and has built an amazing company, from scratch. And so it's a pleasure to talk to her about the changing face of comics and how she got her start, the stuff that inspires her, and all kinds of other subjects. I know you're going to love it. My guest today is C. Spike Trotman, and you've been in this business for a little while now. We've been doing the comic thing for some time. I think the first time you and I met might have been, I want to say like 2006, maybe 2007. It was like, yeah, I seem to recall meeting you. I know. It was probably San Diego Comic-Con, and it was one of the evenings where the Udon crew were like sitting around drawing. And I'm pretty sure it was someone's hotel room. Everyone's just sitting around drawing, and it's like all the mainstream people were off doing the boozy thing at the bars, and we were just sitting around like eating pizza and drawing and talking about the internet and all that kind of stuff.
The uncool kid table, yeah. Back when putting comics on the internet was disreputable.
That's right. There wasn't. See, I don't think people understand that now. Like the main, but even the internet itself. It sounds weird to say. That transition period where it was like, oh, on the internet, well, how do you make money? Like, how does this function? Because the entire economy was not predicated on connectivity and social media and online everything, right? So
yeah, exactly. It makes me feel like an old crone, sitting in my rocking chair by the fire to be all like, gather around and let me tell you about the time where you would be cornered by people at the Comic-Con telling you you are personally devaluing your own work by giving it away for free, and thus further devaluing the work of every other cartoonist by giving it away for free. And you must stop immediately and go through the proper channels if you wanted to be a professional cartoonist. It happened. I was there.
So amazing. And I remember that. I remember these like knockdown, drag out fights about what was real cartooning and real publishing and real
who counted
art
as published. Yeah.
I mean, if you had a DeviantArt page and you were a professional, were you really a professional, or were you just
DeviantArt. Oh, the before times, the long ago. Oh my god.
It's fascinating, right? Like these were conversations people were having. Like, should a professional, post their email address? Like, what are you doing? Like, this is strange things. Like, you're not, like you said, you're not going through the proper channels. So before we get into all that kind of stuff, I want to kind of roll it back even further. I want to talk about your kind of entryway into comics, first as a reader and then as a professional. What kind of comics did you grow up with? Or
well, if you want to start from like the beginning,
sure, bedrock it.
I grew up during what I consider like the final golden age of the newspaper comic. Okay. And that was when The Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes and comics like that were kind of at their apex. It was one of those bizarre things where everyone recognized how amazing they were in their time. Like there wasn't any sort of retrospective. Wasn't it great when people understood how amazing Calvin and Hobbes was at the time.
And that unique quality where it ended while it was still popular. It didn't
it went out on a high.
Out its last or throttle itself into oblivion with merchandising or something like that. Yeah.
And it's like Bloom County was like, Berkeley Breeze was like, he did Bloom County and then he stopped and then he did Outland and then he kind of did something. So it's like that was in the mix too. And I remember very distinctly seeing the Tyrannosaurs and F-14s strip like in the Washington Post one Sunday, and just like genuinely not being able to comprehend how someone could draw that well. It's like a small child. How do you even do that? How do you draw an F-14 that well? How do you draw a Tyrannosaurus that well? And how do you put them both together? That blew my mind. I was completely like so impressed by that. And while I was impressed by that, though, I kind of at the same time didn't really want to do newspaper comics. That was sort of never a thing that super appealed to me. I had a cousin who entirely too young, and again, I have to set the scene for this. You have to picture a time period where like the sauciest cartoon I had seen was Gem from like Gem and the Holograms.
Yes.
And The Simpsons was not on the air yet. We were like still 2 or 3 years out from The Simpsons. And my cousin had a videotape and he goes, "You want to see something?" And he sticks it in his VCR. And he showed me Akira, completely untranslated, no subs, no dubs, no nothing. So I had no idea what was going on, but I saw the most amazing thing. It still has a completely outsized influence on my tastes. And this was the same cousin, by the way, who had a comic that was so read to pieces. He had actually taken the cover and he taped it to his wall like a poster because it had fallen off. Amazing. And it was the original Eastman and Laird Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic.
Yes.
And so that kind of opened a door for me onto like the world of small press, indie comics, things like that. And when I started reading stuff like that, I was reading a ton of Evan Dorkin. I was reading
Milk and Cheese.
A lot of the Paradox Press books, those were coming out, and they were like, you know, the big book of this, the big book of that. I read a bunch of those. I was reading, what's it called? Strangers in Paradise. That's another one. Yeah. I read a lot of Strangers in Paradise. I basically stole a big like omnibus copy from a friend. That was good. Sorry about that. If you're listening, sorry. I'll get you back one day. I was reading the Max. Does anyone remember like the MTV?
Oh, the Max was amazing. I loved the comic and the cartoon. And the cartoon, it was the most comic feeling adaptation I'd ever seen, because they would actually squeeze the aspect ratio of the screen. Like they would have these black bars shoot across, or they would have these still images sort of slide into place. It felt like living comic books. It was so cool. Yeah.
And I was also reading here's one for like just a deep cut. This isn't even a B side. This is like a D, E, F side maybe. If anyone remembers Martin Wagner's Hepcats, I read that.
I remember Hepcats. Yep.
Yeah, and there was, what's the name of this one? It was like about elves, blood elves, dark elves, something like that.
Oh, I think I know the one. Are you talking to? Oh, geez.
It used to be called Lucifer, but spelled funny. And then because no comic shop would carry it.
Is it Death Elves? No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I'm going to find it and I'll put the cover up. And
it's one of those things that it kind of amazes me because like, bam, that has completely sort of disappeared from the consciousness of comics. And I remember when that was like the hottest shit. Like people like loved that comic. And it's like people are.
Do you know what's so fascinating? So I've been doing several of these interviews, and whenever I talk to people about those books that influenced them, I immediately then roll back and think of their work, and I go, "Oh yeah, like that's all the bedrock right there." I can literally see those influences in a good way, and you could see it in my stuff as well. When I tell you the books I grew up on, and then you read my comics, and you go, well, duh, like that's so obvious to me. You know what I mean? Like I was talking to this writer named Jed McKay, and his stuff has this like funky kind of noir and martial arts and stuff. And he's talking about reading Master of Kung Fu in the 70s. And I'm like, of course, like that just makes sense to me. Oh, and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I could just start sort of seeing the little pieces falling into place. And when I think of course, Strangers in Paradise, of course, the Max, of course, all these things, I can see all that in your work, which is amazing, you know?
And I just, it's wild to sort of like look back at that time period in comics, because it was like post black and white boom. It was like, that was after like a huge die off in like comic shops proper. And that was when Diamond, this is so like funky industry behind the scenes, behind the curtain stuff, when Diamond just like had consolidated and either bought up or run out all distros. And it was just like this monolithic.
Well, Heroes World crumbled, like Marvel tried to make their own distribution and failed at it. And that gave Diamond the power to snap up everyone else. It was this sort of double play.
I like my biggest memory of comics in college is like no one wanted to read them with me. So every weekend or every other weekend, I would go down to, if it's still there, holler, shout out to Criminal Records in Atlanta, Georgia. There's a neighborhood in Atlanta called Little Five Points, and Little Five Points has, or at least it had when I was there, a comic shop called Criminal Records, because it was one of those like super hip. It also sold records and vinyl and CDs, and it sold comics too. And that's where I got like 90% of my comics in college. And my one sort of positive memory of comics in college was people would, it was so weird. It was so predictable. People would find out I read comics. They would be, they still make those? And then I would loan them my copy of Bone, the cartoon
Yes.
books, black and white version of Bone. There was no omnibus yet. It was still in progress. So I would just loan them out, like the hardcovers I'd collected. I'd give them the first one, and every single person at college.
Right here on my shelf.
Yeah, I have those. I have those.
Ones.
And I would loan them out the first one. Invariably, every single time, they would come back and like, is there more to this?
Yes.
And I'd give them whatever was there at the time, and they'd be like, I didn't even know stuff like this existed.
I know.
Which is, like, hilarious.
Those are so universally good. I remember each one of those hardbacks would come out, and it became like, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to sit down and just, like, the rest of the world doesn't exist, and I'm just going to cherish every page of this thing, because that book was so
it's also the perfect, if anyone here is interested in a gateway drug to someone who might be skeptical about comics, and or they say something like, oh, I don't like Marvel movies, so I'm pretty sure I don't like comics, because you know that's pretty common.
Sure.
Comics as a genre, not a medium, like just buy them a copy of Out from Boneville. That's it. Just get them.
It's brilliant. It's timeless, and it feels like the best of kind of your classic Disney adventure stories, but it's totally new reader friendly, and it's so clear, and the storytelling is so great. I prefer the black and white version personally. There's nothing wrong with the colors. There's nothing wrong with the colors, and I think everyone did a really good job, but it's like an unnecessary kind of step. Like, I love the purity of the ink line, and the staging that Jeff has is so immaculate.
It's beautiful.
It's unbelievable.
And I was like, it's like, that's the hill I die on in my heart constantly, where it's like, I'm like signing talent and stuff to Iron Circus, and they're all like, well, if I wanted to do it in black and white, would that be okay? I'm like, yes, I love black and white. Black and white is a legitimate expression. Limited color palettes are like the best ever. It's totally okay. You don't have to be in color.
Right.
But
so how did that, you know, kind of primordial material, how did that lead to you starting to make your own comics? You said you went to school. What'd you go to school for?
Well, I began making my own comics in high school. I made mini comics. And again, this is another like D side, E side, F side. If anyone here has a copy of Fact Sheet 5, like from the 90s, mid 90s, you can probably find my submissions to Fact Sheet 5 in the mid 90s, where I made obvious, painful ripoffs of Milk and Cheese. That was my first foray into that. And from then on, I made stuff that was, it was so like Hi, I'm 20, you know, those kind of comics. It's like art school sucks. All these adults around me are terrible. Here are the horrible people I meet. And I would make mini comics of that. And at the time I started selling those mini comics in particular, I was out of college, and I had moved to Chicago to go to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. But previous to that, I'd gone to Spelman College, and this is becoming a less and less useful description, but if anyone is wondering what Spelman College is, if you've ever seen the TV show A Different World, and everyone there goes to a college called Hillman, that's where I went. I went to Spelman. Hillman, all the external shots you see of Hillman on A Different World, that's my college. That's where I went. Of course, it was fictionalized.
And what did you go for? You went for like illustration or for?
I went in for pre-med, and then first semester when you do things to get your parents to pay for stuff. And first semester, I kind of had this epiphany when I was in a like 8 a.m. biology class, and I was just sitting there, and while the lecturer is like droning on about whatever, I was just sitting there, and you kind of have that realization, like, if I have to do this for the rest of my life, I'm not going to fucking make it. Like, I thought maybe I could make this work. Maybe I could like find a love for this. Like, my parents were sort of like Black Republican, upper middle class, Potomac, Maryland kind of people. And they were and for folks who don't know about Potomac, Maryland, again, let's do a media reference. Originally, Beverly Hills 90210 was going to be Potomac, Maryland 20854.
Really?
Wikipedia, it's true. It's just that the creator of the show, when he pitched it to Hollywood, the answer was, no one knows what the fuck a Potomac is. Set it someplace people know what it is. People know what a Beverly Hills is.
Nice.
But functionally, that could be Potomac. Everything about it. So that's where I grew up, except a lot more like resettled CIA spook type people. That's an entirely different conversation. Anyway,
by the way, if any of you want to see the amazing, you got to follow Spike's Twitter, because you will do the deepest dives on fucked up like pop culture or history or mysterious occult and internet drama. Like, it is a pinball of madness every time I say, oh, Spike's got a thread. What's this one going to delve into?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm a terrible human being and I like terrible shit. So
you're talking about mining towns, or you're talking about like agriculture, or suddenly you're going into some insane, just pedantic bit of internet drama on YouTube. And I'm like, what is going on? Why are you into this right now? Why?
But yeah, anyway, so that when you grew up in that environment, you had basically two options, doctor or lawyer. And
Right.
my parents were so into the idea of me being a doctor, they would literally talk me out of any other thing that I wanted. I remember as a child, I was like, I want to be an archaeologist. My mom goes, no, you don't. You don't want to be an archaeologist. Those people are poor and they work out in the sun all day and they don't ever make any money and they die alone and no one cares about them. You don't want to be an archaeologist, you want to be a doctor. And I was like, okay, so I was 7. And when I got to college and I had my epiphany, I basically went to, before, consulting anyone, I went to the administrative office and I was just like, I would like to change my major to XYZ. Had that done, turned in all the paperwork, did all the shit. And then I wrote an email to my parents that's basically like, I have changed my major from pre-med to studio art. If you don't like that, feel free, because again, Potomac, Maryland is several thousand miles from Atlanta, Georgia, which is where this college is. I was like, if you don't like it, you can come get me. And just have a daughter who didn't go to college, which is like anathema to you in every way.
Right.
So like, go for it. I didn't hear from them for a week. And then I got an email that was just how disappointed they were in me. But it's like, but you're not saying, or else there are no ultimatums in this.
Yeah.
You're gonna let it slide.
I can deal with disappointment as long as I get to do what I want. Yeah.
Exactly. And honestly, me going to Spelman was one of those choices that would have ripple effects in the future that I could have never anticipated.
It's always like that. It's amazing.
90% of the reason I went is my dad basically informed me, if you go to Spelman, I'll pay your way, because he had he's like me, he has a very sort of like structured approach to life. And he decided what he wanted more than anything was a daughter who went to Spelman, which is all girls, by the way, and a son who went to Morehouse, which is all boys, and they're like across the street from each other. And for folks who are unfamiliar, this sort of complex, the Morehouse here and the Spelman here, was kind of considered Black Harvard back in the day when Black people could not get into Harvard. If you were the Southern Black elite, you sent your children to Morehouse or Spelman.
Wow.
And the idea was, since they were across the street from each other, the Morehouse guys can go over to the Spelman campus, and the Spelman girls can go over to the Morehouse campus, and they could meet their future, prospects. And that, to this day, that's kind of what people expect. And it didn't work out for me, but I'm not good at following rules anyway. So anyway, after I graduated with a studio art degree, I moved to Chicago to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which I cannot recommend in any way. At the time I went there, I hear now they have a comics program. When I was there, I was actively discouraged in every way.
Oh, really?
Comics. I lasted a year there. So it's just like, no, this sucks. I wish I could say I dropped out, but what I did is I earned a post-baccalaureate degree and then just didn't go on to a master's. Like the whole point of a post-bac is you go on to a master's. I didn't, because it's like, fuck this. And it was at that point I kind of started in on like a webcomic proper. You know what I mean?
And what year is this?
God, 2000 to 2001.
Oh, really? That early?
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. That, like I said, it was super disreputable. People have been saying this about comics for decades, but in that decade it was especially strong. Like the late 90s, I'm kind of categorizing. There was a lot of don't get into comics, it won't exist in 10 years. Because there was more weight to that than there had been in the past. Like there have always been comics industry doom and gloomers until very, very recently. But well, there are plenty now, but who gives a shit?
There are tons now.
Yeah. Comics isn't exactly the way I want it, therefore it's going to die. Sure, Jan.
So what was your first webcomic?
oh God, shit.
I'm gonna need screenshots of this too.
I'm thinking, I'm trying super hard on this. The first one. I'm going to say, Lucas and Odessa was my first webcomic. This might sound familiar to you. It was on Webcomics Nation, I think was the name of the site.
Okay.
It was one of those sort of like beautiful failures.
Is that like Modern Tales and
yes, Modern Tales was part of that. Modern Tales, Graphic Smash,
Gorilla-matic,
all sort of part of the Webcomics Nation family.
So that would have been 2002 because I think that's when they started up. Yeah,
and the whole idea of it was trying to figure out in a sort of pre-PayPal, pre-Amazon as it currently is, like Venmo, what? Coffee,
right.
Like that, Patreon, huh? Like none of that shit existed, zero.
Right.
And this was an attempt to figure out a way to make comics pay.
To monetize, yeah.
And they wanted to make a subscription site. And I did a comic for them called Lucas and Odessa, which is about a 16-year-old girl who is one of those super duper overachievers. And it was about my interest in failure. And to elaborate on that, imagine being sort of like a 16-year-old girl and you are one of those kids. I went to a school like this. One of those kids who woke up at 4 a.m. to get in 2 hours of ballet practice, put clothes on over your leotard, went to school. Then after school, you came out and then you did 2 more hours of ballet practice and you did that 6 days a week. I knew kids like this. Potomac is full of overachievers like this. And this Odessa is that girl. Odessa is this girl from like a troubled family. And she seems really poised to sort of fulfill this, kid from broken home makes good narrative that a lot of people sort of like want her to fulfill. Like it would be like really romantic and glorious and bootstrappy and fulfill the American dream that you can be whoever you want. But Odessa is now 16 and Odessa she stopped growing a long time ago. She's like 5'2", 5'3". There aren't a lot of ballet dancers that small. She also is kind of fat. And she also grew really big jugs, which is a thing that you cannot help. Some people just grow really big jugs. And she kind of comes to this realization in the comic that she is always like second, third, or fourth best in her class in her shitty little suburb. So if she can't top her class in her shitty little suburb, like Alvin Ailey Dance Theater isn't happening. New York Ballet isn't happening. London Ballet isn't happening. And she's kind of accepting there are limitations to her aspirations, this thing she has been working towards her entire life. Life is not a shonen manga. You can't just try harder.
Right.
And that kind of in a different environment with like a supportive mother and father, or even, a single parent, or even just someone in her life who gave a shit in an obvious way, she wouldn't spiral as super hard as she does in the comic. But in the comic, she like does all the big teen warning signs where she shaves her head, and she puts on 50 pounds. And she, like this former straight A student, just starts like aggressively flunking.
Right.
And no one cares. So like no one does anything. And somehow during the course of her sort of deciding to fucking drive this bullet train directly into a wall, she meets a like 38-year-old alcoholic who is homeless and starts hanging out with him. And this is what she's doing with her life now. That is the aforementioned Lucas. And Lucas doesn't want her there, but she's too convenient because Odessa brings him a bottle of wine or a bottle of gin or whatever whenever she shows up, because she steals from her stepdad, because she doesn't give a fuck about her stepdad, because she's kind of fully embraced this whole sort of I'm a bad kid thing now. Being a good kid isn't working out, so let's try being a bad kid. So that's kind of like what she's doing. And that's what this comic was about, how Odessa was sort of trying to come to terms with.
And that's your first book. Like that's a lot of
it's currently in production right now too, where it's like I abandoned it like a long time ago, but I have given the full script to an artist I've been working with for the past several years on making a full graphic novel, and I get paid
awesome. So how did you go about getting onto Webcomics Nation or whatever it was? Like, how did that happen? Because
I was recruited. Girl-O-Matic recruited me. It was Leah Hernandez who recruited me to Girl-O-Matic, and that was the
Nice.
first comic I posted to Girl-O-Matic. The second comic I did was super experimental.
How
And
did she find your stuff though in the first place? Like, did you have a
that's a good
portfolio?
question. That's a good
Was
question.
it just literally an email out of the blue on your website or
I
something? Like,
think
were you
I was
posting
selling
art?
mini comics at a convention, and we got to
Okay.
know each other that way.
Okay.
But quite frankly, it's been a while.
Right. Okay.
And my second comic on Girl-O-Matic was not very Girl-O-Matic appropriate, but you know, it ran there anyway. And it was called Spark Needle, and it was very somebody reads a lot of Frank, someone really likes Jim Woodring kind of flavor,
Nice.
which is true. And it was another comic I abandoned, running theme in my life, where it was, well, I don't know if you could say abandoned because it was very chapter based. It didn't really go anywhere. It was very freeform. It didn't really have a plot.
Okay.
And it was just about a really, really mean angel and the devil that followed her around. And they were all super naked all the time. And I remember that was super interesting to do that. It was mostly just me being a shitty kid, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I did it because, you know, I like drawing naked people.
Right.
Another recurring theme. And I wanted to see what would happen if I did. And it was very like Dee Dee from Dexter's Laboratory is like, what does this button do?
Right.
And the reaction was everything I hoped for, because again, I was a shitty kid. I still am a shitty person, but I was shitty in a different way. And there's a lot of, oh, is this appropriate? I'm like, yeah. I was like, what are you gonna do about it? Fight me. And this sounds petty and stupid, but I have to repeat it. One of my favorite memories from my time on Webcomics Nation was there was a program between all the sister sites, so you know, Graphic Smash, Modern Tales, Girl-O-Matic, et cetera, where they were basically like, hey everyone, submit a advertising, like a promo graphic, and we'll put it in our banner
Rotation.
ads.
Yeah,
banner ad rotation. And I submitted a bunch for Spark Needle that had some very naked people on it. And it got a lot of clicks because a lot of naked people. And as time went on, other comics, even comics that were like completely PG, even G-rated comics, began finding the sauciest panels they had drawn. And instead of like trying to do these really informative banner ads, it's like, you know, come read about kittens on the moon with, you know, on Graphic Smash or whatever. They would start submitting like O-face kitten or whatever, like even if it was like totally had nothing to do with anything.
That's amazing.
They would try and find the sexiest, nakedest panels they could and turn those into banner ads.
Oh, low did they know the future of the internet.
And because of the way the banner systems work, we could see the file names for all of these banner ads going up. And my personal favorite was going with what obviously works. Because we can also see how often everyone else's banner ads are being clicked.
Amazing.
So it was like, oh yes, it does work. You are correct.
That's a compliment, yes.
As much as I enjoyed my time on Webcomics Nation, and this is why those comics are abandoned, by the way. When I give up on a comic, you can pretty much assume it's because I found something that paid me better. And I know how that sounds, but that's how it is.
Yeah.
I was at MoCA in New York City, a convention in New York City, and I saw Joey Manley, who is sort of the founder, ringleader of Modern Tales, Graphic Smash, all those sites, and he actually personally handed me a check for my cut of Girl-O-Matic's profits. And it was a single-digit check. I think it was $7. And this is for months and months and months of effort. That's important to note.
Right.
And I saw that, and I made a very practical and mercenary decision, because this is also the time period where other creators had their independent comics running on their independent sites, and they were clearly making a living off of it.
Right.
And I was not going to make a living off of a $7 check.
Of course.
I was going to not be the cashier at Pearl, you know, if I lied on being part of this structure that was paying me $7. So it was at that time I kind of started to, I didn't handle it very well because I was young. I didn't send a formal, hey guys, I'm quitting email. I don't think I did. I just sort of kind of stopped uploading.
Just vanished,
and just vanished. And I started doing my main webcomic, which was like Templar Arizona, which was an alternate history comic, which,
and that was when I met you. You were already doing
yeah,
Templar.
and it feels weird because a lot of stuff out of that is real now. A lot of stuff. I recently heard about like a bunch of people in California called the Reclaimers who are occupying houses that are government owned, like forcibly breaking in and occupying them and being like pig when people try to get them to leave. And a major group in Templar, Arizona was a group called Reclamation, which did exactly that. They were communists who forcibly seized abandoned properties and redid them into, you know, public housing. And
so
like,
Templar is like it's this ensemble piece of characters, right?
yeah,
like
it was very sort of influenced by what I was reading maybe a couple years prior, and that'd be stuff like, you know, Love and Rockets, Hectic Planet, things like that. And I intended it to go for like, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 pages, which is, hey everyone, don't do that. Don't fucking do that. Don't do that. It was, I thought it was going to be the thing that I worked on for sort of the rest of my comic career.
Right.
And no, it's at the time though, it was exactly what I was looking for. What Webcomic Station couldn't give me, Templar Arizona did. Again, this is all predating sort of the Venmo coffee, et cetera stuff. At this point, a significant percentage of people trusted the internet enough to use PayPal, but not a lot. So that's kind of putting us in that time frame. And I had a little inkwell graphic on my website and a little thermometer on it. And I just said, for every $200, instead of twice a week, I will upload 3 times a week. And the day I put that up, I got like 4 or 5 weeks in the kitty. And I was like, oh my God, actual money, it's really working. And when I had enough for a book and people began asking, when is there going to be a book? I actually kickstarted the book before it was called kickstarting or crowdfunding. I did what a lot of cartoonists did and what got a lot of cartoonists in trouble. And I took my life in my hands and I researched what it would cost to make a print run of book 1. And I made another thermometer graphic and I put it on my website. I said, hey, everyone, it's going to cost me $6,000 to print the first volume of Templar Arizona. Here is my PayPal address. I've decided the book is going to be $12. If you want a copy of Templar Arizona, please press this link and give me $12 plus shipping. And when the book is printed, I will get you a copy of the book. And inside 2 weeks, I had $6,000, which was like, you know, it was like amazing. Right? Oh my God, real money, it actually works. At this time, I was making a living, like doing commissions, and also primarily, this sounds unthinkable these days, I was very into advertising banner ads on the Templar page. Okay. This sounds super fake, but at the time,
there was a small period where advertising on webcomics and on websites that had really dedicated audiences actually worked really, really well. Yeah,
I was never top tier there. I was on a good month, you know, between 800, maybe 1,000, maybe. That was very rare. But there were people who could pull in $3,000-4,000 if they were popular enough and they did what was called the ad cascade correctly. Okay. And I'm going to try and describe this as efficiently as possible. There were ad agencies, and the ad agencies had different CPMs, which was cost per thousand. I know it feels like it should be million, but it's thousand, which is basically, if you show this ad 1,000 times, we'll give you $1. Let's pretend that's $1 CPM. Sure. If you had a ton of traffic, if you had 30,000 visits a day, you know, that could make a decent amount of money. So you signed up for the premium ad networks with the highest CPMs, who would only serve you so many ads a day, because obviously they don't want to, you know,
blow their budget.
Yeah. And once they run out of ads to serve you, you put a piece of code on your site to kick it down to the next profitable ad network. And then you kick that down to the next profitable ad network. And you kick that down till at the very bottom, you have Google ads, which will serve you ads no matter what. You know, they don't care. Yeah. And there are people who could make thousands of dollars a month if their ad cascade was right. And there were forums and like secret groups that were full of people talking about, oh, you have to join this ad
To
network, and here's what to
optimize.
say when on the forum where you apply to join it. Here's this and here's that, and that worked out really well. I'd say for like 2-3 years, and I like strongly aspired to get into the top tier. It never happened because of Adpocalypse. And Adpocalypse was that's been used multiple times. I know right now people apply it to what's going on with YouTube, but what was happening in webcomics years ago, Adpocalypse was basically ad networks decide what to serve on the website by spidering your site, looking for keywords, and then feeding that back into their database. So if you talk a lot about power tools, they'll serve you John Deere ads. They'll serve you Craftsman ads, et cetera, et cetera. Comic sites, by and large, were very image-based. Sure. And you cannot spider an image. And a decision was clearly made among multiple ad networks to stop accepting comic sites. And when they found comic sites on their network, they dumped them. And they just started dumping comic sites hard. And people were in a literal fucking panic because they were going from like $2,000 of steady income a month to nothing.
Right.
And there are horror stories of people having a glitch in their ad network and calling up customer service and being like, hey, I need some help on this. And the customer service person navigating to their page and going, oh, you're a comic, and then canceling them right there. And so like you lived in terror, especially people who are making like livelihoods, people who are literally supporting families off of their ad revenue. I was never in that spot. I never made like a family supporting amount of money, but that still sucked. Losing that money.
I mean, any amount of money, hundreds of dollars that you had come to rely on suddenly not being there. Absolutely. Yeah.
It was bad. But that was kind of like the webcomic sort of wake up point for a lot of people, where a lot of folks who are making webcomics are like, why make print comics? It doesn't matter. I can make all this money and just chill out on ad network money for the rest of my life. And like, no, you can't. After that, kind of Project Wonderful filled the gap a lot. Project Wonderful was by Ryan North. He is a great guy. I shouldn't say was. Oh my goodness. He is a great guy.
He's known now in totally different circles, which is funny.
Yeah, exactly. It's bizarre to think that most people are like, Project what? But Project Wonderful was basically an auction site for ad space on nerd in general, but specifically very comics focused sites where, let's say, and I did this a lot. Let's say I wanted to get ad space on something positive, or I wanted to get ad space on, gosh, I don't know, It's Walkie or another comic like that. And I'd go to the site, I'd look them up, and they, like, the person currently occupying the ad space is paying $1 a day. And I basically, so I'll pay $2 and I would get the spot. And if somebody decided to vote me up super, like say, well, I'll pay $50 a day, okay, you can have that spot. But once that $50 is up, if someone, is pushing higher and saying, I'll pay more, you lose that spot. It's auction model. It worked really well for the several years it did work until somebody with too much loot began gaming the system and basically killed the whole thing. But again, another story. Oh, wow. Ancient comics drama. But yeah, that was really nice. That was good for like $200 a month for Templar, Arizona. And at this point, I was printing books. I was doing conventions. I was selling at conventions. A good convention, we were really frugal. We were doing the deal where it was like 6 of us to a room, and all of us sort of made a 7-Eleven run on Friday afternoon, and that's what we ate. We didn't go to bar cons, we didn't go to restaurants. We just went right back to the hotel room and had watch parties or something. And done that way, a convention.
No wonder you were so up for coming to the Udon hangout and free pizza and all that stuff. You're like, wait a minute.
Yeah. I wrote a book about being poor, remember?
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, but I would maybe pull a bad con would be like $800, $900. A good con would be $2,000 to $2,500 on a weekend, which was again really good money if you're a cartoonist. And I did that for years and years. And then
how many shows a year would you do?
Oh God, like I don't even know. I think my most I did like 18 or 19. I did a lot of shows a year because that was kind of a point where like cons were just coming up everywhere. I do any little like itsy bitsy teeny weeny pissant con. I'd like do it.
Because
And
I was doing a lot of shows with the Udon crew. And so I think I tapped out somewhere around 17 in a year. And of course, it's not one a month and a couple more. It was all crammed into the summer and the spring, right? So
yeah.
you're cramming 17 shows into really like an 8-month period, which was
And
bonkers.
you would see like the same people there, like specifically like the kind of people who set up booths to sell like really low quality bootleg stuffies of Naruto characters and shit. And you like come to recognize, you'd never talked to him, you never met him in your life. It's like, there he is again.
The circuit.
But yeah.
So you're doing all these shows, and then the big transition happens with the arrival of Kickstarter. That kind of changes everything for you. So what year is that, and how does this all sort of
I want to say 2009 was that, where I was still doing kind of like workhorse shit, doing webcomic shit, just, you know, scraping by. One of the cons that I did, which is a fantastic con, by the way, if anyone is ever in Chicago at the time it is happening, it's called Cake. And it was like a one-room show. It's really great. And of course, part of the reason that's great for me is it's zero cost. It's like down the street.
What we lovingly call throw shit in the car con.
Yes, my expenses for Cake are a lift, you know, to the show. That's it. And it's great to do for that reason. I was doing a panel there with Gordon McAlpin, and we were talking about how we fund comics. And I was telling horror stories, including people I know who have like gotten a loan taken out against their car to print their first print run. Yeah. And I talked about how I did the whole PayPal thing. And you know, that is dangerous because PayPal they'll kill your account if they find out you're selling an item that technically doesn't exist. Pre-ordering on PayPal is not allowed. But like everyone in comics did it, but you're not supposed to. But yeah, and in case you couldn't tell, getting your PayPal account shut down kind of puts a damper on the whole e-commerce.
Kind of the death knell. Yeah.
It's dangerous. But I was talking about that, and Gordon mentioned something. Well, there's this site called Kickstarter, and he explained it to me like on the stage, and I was like, cool. And I went home and I looked it up, and I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. This is perfect, because I have this idea for a book called Poorcraft, which is kind of like the book I wish people had handed me when I turned 18. It's a book on just how to choose a roommate, how to find an apartment, how to cook for yourself, just basic shit, how to go to school debt free, what to do if you get into serious debt, just a lot of life lessons. There used to be classes in high school that like covered this sort of thing.
Home economics.
Home economics and skills for living and things like that, but not really anymore. At least not in my experience. But I remember thinking, wow, it's like, this is a book I've talked frequently about wanting to make, but like the money for it simply does not exist. And I had an artist lined up, but I didn't want to ask them to work for free. That's kind of what shitty people do. So I, you know, kind of just sort of floated there and nothing happened. And then I learned about Kickstarter. I'm like, oh. And I set up my little first Kickstarter, and I had it launch. I wasn't there when it launched. I was in an airport. It was very weird because like I remember very clearly what was happening, because that was back when I just had I didn't have like a smartphone. I had, you know, a flip phone. And in case you folks didn't know, when Air Force One lands at the airport you are at, every flight in that airport is grounded. So Air Force One landed, and everyone was just sort of like sitting there like, because they couldn't get on their plane. No movement was allowed when Air Force One was on the ground at your airport. And so we were all just sort of sitting there, and I was pacing up and down the waiting area because I was so abuzz with nervous energy because I was kept getting these text updates from my husband. And I remember I asked for like $6,000, I think, to fund Poorcraft. I mean, the Kickstarter page is still up. You can go see. And I ended up making $13,000. And I made like $2,000 in the first hour or something like that. And I was like, oh my God, this is working. This is working. It's working. This is working. And it was around then that, you know, a certain contingent in comics who is literally not worth mentioning, he began making a bunch of noise about, oh, well, this is just begging. This is just being a hobo with your hat out. Just go stand on the street corner if you're going to do this. This is so classless. This isn't how you do it. And when Poorcraft ended up closing out at $13,000, I think, I'll never forget like this one forum post that delights me to this day. To this day, I think of that forum post and laugh, which is like, Kickstarter isn't for the kind of people who can just ask for $13,000 and get it. And like part of me is like, I didn't ask for $13,000.
I mean, look at now the corporations that backed up the dump truck to Kickstarter. Like, it's so insane.
Yeah, and they were just like, anyone who can get $13,000 on a Kickstarter should be approaching publishers. They shouldn't be on Kickstarter. It's not for someone who can make that much money. And whenever I see a new Kickstarter fucking break the $1 million mark, when Shenmue 3 shows up, when Keanu Reeves shows up, when De La Soul shows up, I'm all like, I wonder what that person thinks these days.
Yeah, it reminds me of when email was first getting going, like amongst my kind of age group, and I had enough friends from sort of high school and college that I wanted to stay in touch with, but I would send out almost like an email newsletter to them. It was like a blog, because I wasn't posting it publicly, but I was this kind of, here's what's on my mind, and here's what I'm worried about, and here's what I'm reading, and here's what I'm doing, and how are you doing, kind of thing. But I can't send that to 40 people individually typed up. So I send it out like a group email, BCC to everyone. And I got an email from one of my friends at the time, so angry that they were getting this generic email. They were like, oh, I don't deserve a customized message. Who do you think you are, that you think you're special, that you could just send out this thing? And they were so angry about it. And they were like, if you really wanted to stay in touch, you would send me personalized messages or whatever. And I think about that when blogs took off, and when social media and Twitter and all these things, and I'm like, wonder what they think of that now. I wonder what they think of all that, if that ever dawns on them, that they were so enraged that I was like staying in touch electronically or whatever, like. Yeah, it's fascinating. But that's the thing about these changing, times and changing tides of technology and connectivity and all that kind of stuff. And so you are out in front, you do this thing. Obviously, it's a huge eye-opener.
I ground-floored Kickstarter. I launched my first Kickstarter the year Kickstarter was founded.
Right.
And like, it always, to me, was a concept that was ridiculously obviously good, because like I mentioned, I was already doing it before it had a name. I wasn't the only one. I was already crowdfunding before it was crowdfunding. I was just doing it in a way that was significantly riskier than using Kickstarter. And it's like, well, this is better than using PayPal. For one, it won't get my PayPal shut down. For two, it's transparent and it's automated. It's going to be way better at keeping track of everyone's address and automatically updating the goal amount than I am. And three, it's going to like make this sort of locus point that people can kind of gather around. Every time I have another idea like Poorcraft, I can just bother the Poorcraft people again. Hey, here's my new project.
Here's the thing. Yeah.
And because of that, I don't know how many I've run at this point, like 28, 29, something like that. I have sort of coalesced at this point. Every time I run a Kickstarter now, 40,000 people get an email about it.
Right.
And on my private email list, my personal email list that I've had for like a million years, like 8,000 people get another email about it. And as a result, pretty much everything I run, if it doesn't fund in an hour, it funds in 3 or 6. It always funds first day.
And so you ended up creating your own publishing house off the back of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
When did that transition from just I'm doing this off and on for individual projects to I'm going to make Iron Circus and I'm going to make this a thing and turn this into a formalized publisher?
That owes a lot to Smut Peddler.
Yeah. What year is that?
Oh God. I want to say 2012. I want to say 2012. Iron Circus became a publisher kind of in its own right in 2012, and Smut Peddler was the first anthology we published, and the whole general idea of it was my husband and myself made sort of a personal list of artists we'd love to see draw dirty comics and emailed them, and you'd be surprised how quickly some of them were, yes, oh my God, yes. And this was back before Iron Circus had any cachet. There was like people, I don't want to say, it sounds bad when I say people didn't trust Iron Circus.
Right. Well, you hadn't done that many
I hadn't
books.
done anything like that, so I had to pay out of my savings.
It's different, one thing to be making your own books, but to say I am going to pay all of you, or you are all going to get paid, is different.
And comics is full of shady assholes who never pony up. Like, I totally understand that.
When I'm paying for creator-owned stuff that I'm putting together, I think people are surprised how quick I pay. And I'm just like, well, I got to treat people the way I want to be treated as a freelancer. And if I've got the money, that's the whole reason we're doing this project. Like, I would not do this otherwise, that's not. And
as a result, from the very beginning, I had this whole thing set up where part of the incentive for being in an Iron Circus anthology is, as the Kickstarter makes more money, instead of that money going in like my pocket exclusively, it gets divvied up among the creators. So for every $10,000, everybody involved gets a $5 page rate increase.
Right.
And that is a model that is, I'm very glad to say, is copied by pretty much every comics anthology that now kickstarts. And I'm really happy to have established that, to have like literally invented that. I'm really pleased. And the Smut Peddler anthology, when the first one that launched, people didn't know it was going to work. They didn't know if it was going to work. They didn't know if anyone was going to fund it or if there's going to be any demand for it. And as a result, I paid the base page rate out of my own pocket for everyone. Right. So when I pressed the launch button on Smut Peddler, I had like, I want to say like $600-700 to my name, maybe 300. I don't remember. I didn't, like, if you went to my bank account and looked, I had a few $100s left in my name, period, because I had given all these people all these thousands of dollars for Smut Peddler. And I should note here, it was a readaptation of my Smut Peddler, the Iron Circus edition of Smut Peddler. It began life as a series of mini comics from an imprint called Saucy Goose.
Okay.
And it was smaller. It was one of those digest size mini comics. And it kind of had the same premise where small press creators just made dirty comics. And this was their like little dirty comics secret. And it had people in it like Carla Speed McNeil. And it was super awesome. I loved it. And I was basically harassing the creator of Saucy Goose endlessly, of Smut Peddler endlessly, going, hey, so when's there going to be a new Smut Peddler? When's there going to be a new Smut Peddler? And eventually she said, you want to do it? And I was like, don't say that if you don't mean it, because I'll do it. And she was like, no, you can totally do it. I'll help you. And that's kind of where Smut Peddler came from. It is an adopted child from Saucy Goose. And when like I said, I pressed launch on it and I was like, I feel in my heart this will do well. And the first Smut Peddler ended up clearing like $82,000, which is way more than I thought it would make.
Do you remember the base amount for funding? It was
God, it was not that much.
I mean, I'll look it up. And
I want to say 10,000. I could be wrong. And I was like, it'd be cool if this funded to like 40. And it ended up making 82. And that was kind of the jet fuel that, quite frankly, and a lot of people are going to be sad to hear this, this is like where I sort of decided Templar now takes a step down in priority from publishing books on Kickstarter. Because while I love Templar, and to this day I regret that it had to go back burner, I don't consider it abandoned. I consider it just really, really low priority. I kind of am a self-employed creator in the creative arts. I'm not paying into any 401k. I don't have a retirement fund. I don't have any. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, there's kind of no insurance that'll pay out. And that's a thing that I took on. I was fully cognizant of what I was getting myself into. And if I can be like, we're all just trying to survive under capitalism, dude. And I knew that I could be taken out of the game really quickly, like, because again, pre-GoFundMe stuff. So it was just one of those deals where it's like, I made a decision that I felt was for my own best interests that allowed me to keep doing something I loved doing. I mean, if I totally gave up, go be a graphic designer somewhere and get on, infrastructure, some big company's health plan or whatever. And that's not what I want. But Iron Circus, and people think this is kind of mercenary, but I describe Iron Circus as my retirement plan, because the two options for me is they're going to either find me dead at my desk one day, you know, and I'll be like that guy on Pawn Stars, like the old man who just sits in the back room because he founded the company. And he's just like that's going to be me. And so I'll like functionally never retire, but kind of have retired, but I'm not retired. Like it's still mine, you know, like just grabbing it to me like a Skeksis emperor grabbing a scepter. Or one day I'll decide I've fucking had enough. Right. And I will basically put the word out in the way that folks do, that Iron Circus is for sale, and see what I can get for it. And I'll leave. And those are like my two options, because there are no other options.
But I don't think that's mercenary to build something and then decide what you want to do with it. I mean, that's any creator-owned IP. That's any, you know, any.
Can I tell you something terrible?
I mean, only if you want the entire internet to see it.
This is a story I've said before, but when I was doing cons in my 20s, and this is again a big influence on sort of my decision to focus on running a comic company over making comics myself. I remember a sort of rooted in feature of a lot of comic conventions was like Old Timer Alley, where there would be these 70 or 60, 70, 80-year-old men who were drawing like $50 commissions, which was a lot back in the day, $50 commissions of characters they created, but technically did not own. So technically they weren't allowed to do it, but like Marvel, DC, et cetera, just turned a blind eye of characters they created. And there would be lines to get these sketches for like the creator of Superman, creator of Wolverine, the creator of this, that, not Superman, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they were doing this to pay nursing home bills.
Yeah.
They were doing
I've seen it, you know, the hero initiative and all that stuff is built off of this weird base of, hey, these people got their money in the moment that they did the work, and there is literally nothing else. Yep.
That's what work for hire is. Yeah. You get it, and people would talk to each other about, oh man, I wish I could draw for Marvel. You know, those guys get 400 a page, 400. Like, yeah, they get 400 for a page. And this is another sort of related story. I have an acquaintance who in his youth did art for Lucasfilm, like Star Wars art. And he has a habit now, every time he walks into a bookstore and sees a new Art of Star Wars book, he picks it up and looks for his work. And more often than it is not, it is in there.
Right.
And it is a piece of work he did 30 years ago. And they have been selling it over and over and over for 30 years. And that left an impression on me, and Old Timer Alley left an impression on me.
And you know, for me, it's always been about striking that balance. Like, you are in a relationship with a company like Marvel, and you're basically saying you have the power of this IP and this world renowned whatever, and I am going to benefit from that in the time that I'm doing it, because having the word Avengers after my name is potent. But I know that what that means. Do you know what I mean? And if that is the sum totality of my output, that is a problem, because I am never going to be able to sustain myself on that stuff. Do you know what I mean? On particularly on old work. And no matter how good I am, and no matter how whatever insane delusions of grandeur I might have in the moment, if they can get rid of the creators of those things, if they can get, if they can fire, you know, Chris Claremont off X-Men as it's the #1 book after 17 years, you will never be indispensable. And that is just like, be aware of what you're doing. Like, if you dip into that pool, just know what that means, you know?
Yeah, this sounds extremely terrible to say, but there is such a thing as like too big to fail, I guess is a good way to put it, where there are going to be people out there that go out and buy copies of Fantastic Man, and they may complain, they fucking hate this arc in Fantastic Man. It sucks. It's the worst thing they've ever read. They're going to buy it next month too. And they're going to buy it the month after that.
Some of this stuff is definitely inertia.
Yeah. And if you think the companies aren't aware of that, you're delusional.
Right.
And so they understand there are writers and artists that readers prefer, but they also understand that at the end of the day, they could probably put a gibbon on some of these books, and people will still buy them. So
Right.
while it's great to be sort of considered, oh, you know, you wrote the best X-Men arcs of like the 90s, you're my favorite writer, then that probably feels super good. I can't help but notice, having sort of the span of time to look back on, how many incredibly appreciated and celebrated comics writers eventually said, fuck this, and moved on to prose because they wanted something they could own. And
Yeah,
you see
it's always got to be, you've got to just have that awareness when you're a part of this sort of thing, or when you're deciding what you want to, where your threshold is on that stuff. And I find a lot of people, they're not thinking about this holistically in terms of their career. They're always thinking about, well, if I get this opportunity at this publisher, everything's going to be okay, or that is my dream as a child, and therefore I'll have fulfilled this thing. And it's like, I am very, very, very fortunate. I have worked on a ton of stuff that I loved growing up, and characters that meant a lot to me, and titles that I am thrilled I can put my name to. But at the end of the day, I don't own those things. I don't control those things. And the creator-owned stuff that I've built is the stuff that I actually have skin in the game. Real.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's super important to sort of be aware of, like, but by all means, if you're straight up like staring directly into my eyes and saying, I would crawl through broken glass to do an arc on X-Men, like, make that dream, like, don't let your dreams be dreams. Just do it, go for it. But it has been my experience in kind of not just comics, but life. I think a lot of people are kind of waiting for their big moment where they officially become a pro, and like they're waiting for the comics version of Ed McMahon to knock on their door and hand them, you're officially a comic artist now certificate. And that's not how it works. And you are not going to find a big break, a singular, I should say, in my opinion, in my experience, big break that is going to instantly whip open all the doors. You're going to get a job. And this is all specifically if you're the kind of person who wants to work on hero books, if you want to work on periodical books, you're gonna, maybe, no guarantees in life, get a job, and you're gonna fulfill that job. And if you do a good job and you are easy to work with and you hit your deadlines and your quality is decent, maybe you'll get another job. And then people get another. And you were talking about inertia.
But even then, you've got to carve that stuff out. And the only way to even do that stuff, and this is true of all, even indie books, like no one's going to pay you to do the job until you do work worth paying for. No one's
exactly.
You got to make your own comics. You got to make your own books. You got to learn how to tell stories and make that stuff. And that's the thing, is that one of the things I love about comics is the do-it-yourselfer kind of element that is so at the base of it. Like, if I want to be an independent filmmaker, you're in for tens of thousands of dollars for the shittiest, even a digital production at this point, to look and sound decent. A comic is still cheap. Like very cheap, all things considered. Even if you've got, most of us have a computer in our house. Most of us have access to whatever, Clip Studio or something when it was on sale for $30 or, all those different things that are your startup cost and your ability to learn. And the fact that you're talking about, words and pictures put together in succession is a heck of a lot easier of a ramp up period in terms of learning and mentorship and drawing and all those kinds of things. It's going to teach you a lot and get you. It's just such the do-it-yourselferness of it is what I really love. And the fact is, like most other creative industries, they may have some sort of gatherings, but the things that comic conventions have, where you can literally get a table in Artist Alley, set up, if you've got a little spread there, people will walk by and they go, that looks cool. What is that? You know what I mean? It's comics so unique.
They have this really special place in media because of, again, how accessible they are, especially with internet stuff. And I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm like half a foot away from like a 21-inch Wacom tablet. I have, Clip Studio Paint. I have access to all kinds of stuff. But at the same time, it's like, you don't need.
No, you can start real small. And the other thing I love about it, because it is a medium and not a genre, I loved when Scott McCloud would talk about the fact that he made an indie comic about his obsession with chess. And he got a bunch of chess nerds to read his little indie comic because they saw themselves in that story.
Yeah.
And you see this now more and more where people are using comics to tell personal stories or whatever, the depth and breadth of manga, where you have cooking and sports and history and like all this insane stuff that people can do if they've got a cool idea, And
Yeah,
that's
and it's like what is happening to comics feels kind of surreal right now. Like as a person who got into it in like the late 90s and kind of, in my opinion, barring what Frederick Wardham did, weathered kind of like the worst period in comics as an industry, where it was really kind of teetering on the precipice there for a while. And now I'm seeing people going, oh, hey, look, here's an ad for a web comic in Times Square. It's like there's a big webtoon thing in Times Square, and there are people signing on to Random House for massive deals. And there are people who, they have a roadmap. Even if Random House isn't their thing, if they want to still stay indie, they can just, like fucking 20-year-olds, like graduating from college going, well, my first plan is I'm going to set up a Patreon. I'm going to get started on Tapas and hopefully build my fan base on social media. I'll make sure to update every other day. And then when the time comes to make the book, we'll head to Kickstarter. And then hopefully it's like, holy shit, I wish
these systems did not exist. It's amazing. People talk about even so, because Kickstarter was so new, when I did Skull Kickers, which was sort of my breakout book in terms of writing, we're talking 2009, 2010, when I was in development on it, years later, people have said, oh, how did you fund that book? And I go, well, I had built up a bunch of money and whatever. Oh, so you didn't have to Kickstarter. You weren't like going out and begging. I'm like, oh, but I would have if I had known. Like, I did not know Kickstarter was a thing. Like, those systems in place now are phenomenal. There's a reason why we did a Kickstarter for the 10th anniversary of Skull Kickers, hardcover and tabletop RPG adventure, like, because those systems exist now. That's amazing. Like, we can go directly to a readership. We can find that audience.
You just said my least favorite phrase on earth, by the way.
What's that?
You didn't have to use Kickstarter.
Oh, I know.
Well, bitch, I did. There's this sort of idea where it's like, oh, well, I have access to your bank account, and it says here you could fund it out of pocket. Therefore, Kickstarter is wholly inappropriate. Kickstarter is more than a funding platform. It's a pre-order platform. It's a promotional platform.
Yep. Now, especially,
there's a lot more to Kickstarter than just collecting the money. And quite frankly, having
a discovery platform.
It's a discovery platform too. And quite frankly, having a book like go to press in the black is amazing for any publisher.
Absolutely.
Where it's going to it's like the print run hasn't even been paid for, but it's paid for. And the creator's very first statement is going to be in the black. That's fucking amazing. You should be happy about that. That's good for the publisher. That's good for the creator. That's good for everybody. It's not this like moral decision about, oh, well, leave Kickstarter to people who have no choice but to use Kickstarter.
I think it's this old model of starving artist and the romanticization of that, this idea that, well, if you were a real artist, you would sacrifice yourself for your art form and then come through the other side successful or some shit. And it's like, look, you can be smart about this stuff and you can be slightly mercenary about this stuff and still be creative and still love what you do and still make cool stuff. I don't think that these things
every time I hear like that bullshit about starving artists, I always make sure to just so you know, the whole concept of artists have to be poor or intended to be poor or poverty is the best state for an artist creatively was literally invented by the managerial class and the patron class to keep artists from requesting what they were worth and always make them feel they should be grateful for whatever they get, no matter how little it is. This isn't something that independently blossomed among artists as, oh, we should be poor. That way we could make better art. No, this is something sort of hammered into the heads of artists and creatives by the people who pay artists and creatives.
Absolutely. I think that's a pretty good statement to finish on. I think we've covered some good ground. That's amazing. I'm so glad for your success. What have you got coming up in terms of new projects? What's on the docket?
Iron Circus has recently branched into animation with our latest, not our latest, I don't even know anymore, God. With our Kickstarter, the Lackadaisy animated short.
So amazing.
Tracy Butler writes and draws the incredibly beautiful,
It's
incredibly
unbelievable.
fun.
The very first time I
Lackadaisy-
saw it, I was jealous in its like how beautiful it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell? This thing is stunning.
It's
Yeah.
gorgeous.
Uh-huh.
And now we are working on an animated short for it, funded on Kickstarter. It's our biggest Kickstarter to date. It made like 330. And
Amazing.
for the year plus, we've been working on the animated shorts. If you want to see clips and bits and pieces, you can go to the Lackadaisy Animated Film Twitter or the Iron Circus Twitter. That's Iron Circus Comics, with comics spelled COMIX, because it wouldn't fit the other way, not because I'm cool. And we're always posting clips from animation there. That was something that we've been occupying our time with for over a year.
Awesome.
But coming up on August 23rd, we are launching a Kickstarter for our another adopted child of Iron Circus, which is the Cautionary Fables and Fairy Tales series, which is a collection of fairy tales and stories from around the world. We've done one for Africa, Europe, Oceania, Asia, and now we are doing one for North America.
Amazing.
It's very much into the whole hashtag own voices thing.
Yeah.
We have a lot of Indigenous creators, writers, and artists involved. We had an Indigenous associate editor, associate editor from the Cree tribe. And I learned a lot of interesting shit while this book was being made. Like, for instance, there's a lot of stories that you're not allowed to tell non-tribe members. So a few folks in the book actually had to go to their council of elders and be all like, hey, do I have permission to turn this into a story for this collection?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was like more administration than I thought. It was so cool to learn about. But yeah, The Woman of the Woods and Other Tales of North America will be kickstarting August 23rd. We're really excited about that.
Amazing.
Other than that, we've got a bunch of stuff in the pipe. The final pages for the Poorcraft Cookbook, which has been in progress for a year, have been turned in. That won't hit Kickstarter. We might do a pre-order for it, but that will make it 3 Poorcraft books that are out. So it's a proper series. We're putting together, and hey, why not announce it here? We're putting together our next all ages anthology soon. The theme we've decided to go with is failed future. A lot of people refer to as paleo future, AKA where's my flying car? We're gonna put together an anthology about sort of like various failed futures, and
Nice.
we can't wait to open the submissions process for that. And we are putting together another erotic anthology, a widely requested erotic anthology, a companion piece to one of our best sellers of all time, My Monster Boyfriend, which is going to be My Monster Girlfriend. So that is coming together, and that's just sort of a slice of
that is a ton of different stuff. How many books has Iron Circus put out? Do you have a tally?
I do not know. A lot. We try at this point, we try to put out between 10 and 15 a year.
Holy crap.
Coronavirus has slowed that down a bit for various reasons, but yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Amazing.
Yeah, I kind of want to die a little bit every day.
No, it's great. You are doing awesome stuff, Spike. I don't want to sound pedantic at all. Like I'm really proud of you. I'm super thrilled to see your success. And I love seeing the sheer volume of material you've been able to put together and the amazing artists you've been able to help out and launch their careers and put their work out and pay them an amazing rate and treat them right. And this kind of stuff is really inspiring because people need to see stuff that's outside of the mainstream. I do superhero stuff, but I do non-superhero stuff. I do creator. I started on the web. I love manga stuff. I've traveled to Japan. Like comics as a whole, I love seeing every different facet of it. And the first chunk of interviews that I put together have been very big two focused, but I want to make sure that people know all kinds of other sides to this stuff.
If we're going to close it out, there's a thing I like to say as much as possible, because I know a lot of the audience for this is going to be like aspirants, people who are kind of maybe in the contemplation phase of trying to do comics.
Right.
And the thing I always say now is it's never going to be easy, but it has never been easier. Right. You have never had more ready access to a potential audience that is willing to read a comic no matter what it's about right now.
And put their money down.
Yeah, and put their money out. There are people are totally used to paying for stuff online. They're totally used to subscribing to stuff online. They're totally used to using internet tip jars. It's normal, it's natural, it's nothing like Jim and I had to deal with, where we had to wait for people
Back
to
in
stop
my day,
frightened of PayPal.
walking online uphill both ways.
Exactly. Exactly. And so if you want to give this a try, don't sit there and be all like, well, if it doesn't work out in a year, I quit. This
Right.
is, it's going to be a slow burn, like a lot of artistic careers. The rare individual rolls a natural 20, turns into Rob Liefeld and is a millionaire at 19, you know, but that probably won't be you.
Right.
It probably won't be you. And if you accept that and you work at it and you stand in that fabled 10-year line that comics has, you can make it work with a greater likelihood now than you ever could before.
Awesome. I think that's
go
a
for it, by all
perfect, the perfect note to finish on. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
really
Jim.
appreciate it.
Nice talking to you again.
It's so good to see you. And we're going to see each other at the conventions in
That's a convention.
Yeah, right. And we're just going to be like, what? We're doing this shit again? How did we get here?
And just like touching elbows while we're masked up.
Mm.
Yeah.
Feels good.